Well, today on Editor's Notes on this hot summer day, we are deep diving major highlights and major observations from the recent Cannabis Act Legislative Review Report. Whoa. So let's dive right in before I get too much of a sweat going on. Welcome to another episode of Editor's Notes with me, Cy Williams, Editor-in-Chief of the long-running cannabis culture magazine, Hi Canada Magazine. And today, in this heat, we are deep diving into the findings of the first legislative review of Canada's Cannabis Act. And it's not as much fun as you think, let me tell you, especially with this heat. But here's how it went down, if you do not know. As required by law here in Canada, an independent expert panel conducted a pretty comprehensive assessment of the legal cannabis sector here in Canada, looking at the impacts and administration of the legal cannabis framework during its first 5 years. So the panel heard from over 600 participants through an extensive engagement process. Their final report outlines major observations and recommendations for revising the Cannabis Act and its regulations. So let's go through some of the key highlights together, okay? First one is youth cannabis use and prevention. Okay, one of the primary concerns raised is Canada's continued status among countries with the highest rates of youth cannabis use globally. Now, the report suggests that inadequate support for prevention initiatives like evidence-based school programs has contributed to this trend. The panel, they recommend Health Canada set specific targets to reduce youth and young adult cannabis use and related harms. They call for redoubling prevention efforts, funded by allocating a portion of the cannabis revenues to this. So establishing a representative youth advisory board was also proposed. And this will allow young Canadians to directly provide input on cannabis policies, on education, on campaigns, and on regulatory initiatives that impact them directly. Okay, another highlight was high-potency cannabis products. And the panel expressed increasing concerns around the apparent shift towards high-potency cannabis products containing elevated levels of THC, sadly. Recent studies have linked potent products to increased risks like cannabis-related emergency room visits and psychosis, although these are very few and far between. Their recommendations aim to mitigate these risks, such as defining high-potency products, requiring enhanced health warnings on labels, and simplifying THC CBD content labeling. Now, if the high-potency trend cannot be reversed through measures like consumer education, then the panel recommends or says that Health Canada should be prepared to restrict or prohibit certain products from the legal market, but only if coupled with strategies to prevent the illicit market from dominating that space. Okay, highlight number 3. First Nations, Inuit, and Métis Authority. The report criticized the Cannabis Act for its silence on authorities for Indigenous governments and communities related to cannabis. It acknowledges that this lack of consultation has created significant public health and safety challenges on reserves and in territories across Canada. A major recommendation is amending the Act to authorize agreements between Ottawa and interested Indigenous communities. This could and should allow them to exert more local control over commercial cannabis activities based on agreed upon public health standards. Now, other proposals include more Indigenous led research on cannabis impacts, prevention, resources, and supports to improve licensing processes for Indigenous entrepreneurs. The panel went on to suggest a potential cannabis excise tax revenue sharing model with First Nations. What do you think about that? So another highlight, the fourth highlight, was supporting legal industry and displacing the illicit market. And while encouraged by the process of transitioning adult consumers to the legal regulated market, the panel had recommendations to further support the legal industry's viability and continue to displace remaining illicit sellers. The panel mentioned strategies like reducing regulatory burdens and paperwork for licensed businesses through streamlining by Health Canada. They also proposed reviewing the current excise tax structure, which is overly burdensome now that legal prices have really declined so significantly over the last couple of years. To incentivize legal purchases, the panel suggests options like allowing direct-to-consumer sales from smaller cultivators and processors. So I like that. But they stress the need for more coordinated enforcement against illicit online sales, unlicensed retail stores, and involvement of organized crime in the illicit market. So the fifth highlight was medical access reforms, and sorely needed. On the medical access front, the panel acknowledges that patient challenges like reasonable access and lack of clinical guidance for healthcare professionals is lacking. Key recommendations include establishing a pharmacy distribution channel and developing national clinical guidance materials related to evidence-based use of cannabis for medical purposes. Whew, that's a big mouthful. While calling to maintain a separate medical access stream for now, the panel says reforms are needed, like reducing the allowance for multiple individuals to produce plants at a single site. Okay, so then we jump to the sixth highlight, research priorities and regular reviews. And a consistent observation was the critical lack of research and evidence that still remains 5 years after legalization. In order to fill these gaps, the panel urges prioritizing research in areas of both health and social sciences, sustainable funding for surveillance of cannabis behaviors and impacts is also needed. Now, perhaps most importantly, the panel proposes legislating a requirement for periodic independent reviews of the Cannabis Act itself to make sure continued monitoring and evaluation of the legal framework is there. And those are some of the major highlights from the Cannabis Act Legislative Review Report. And while progress has been made, it's clear that this public health and safety focused framework is still in its early days. As the panel emphasizes, protecting youth, supporting medical access, empowering Indigenous communities, and transitioning consumers to the regulated market must remain high priorities. And all of this should be grounded in continued research and evidence. I encourage you all, everybody watching this, to read the full report for all of the observations and all of the recommendations that this report made. For more efforts are going to be needed from all levels of government to effectively revise and implement this landmark legislation. Okay, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like this video if you learned anything at all, and please subscribe to our channel. It helps us out more than you can possibly know. Okay, that's it for me. As always, stay lifted, stay high, Canada.